Restaurant owner throws out homeless man because of his appearance, but never imagined this act would bring the restaurant to the brink of bankruptcy. The village of Mapleton Creek, nestled in rural Vermont, was famous for two reasons: the culinary festival that attracted tourists from across the country, and the restaurant Taste of Vermont, run by chef Thomas Morgan, a man whose reputation for perfection was as well known as his inflexible temperament. On that opening night of the 20th edition of the festival, Taste of Vermont was impeccable. Crystal glasses sparkled under antique chandeliers, white linen tablecloths covered solid oak tables, and the aroma of Vermont spices hung in the air. The country's gastronomic and social elite occupied every available table, while waiters dressed in impeccable suits glided through the dining room. That's when Lucas Adams appeared at the door. He wore worn clothes, disheveled hair, an unshaven beard contrasting violently with the refined environment. Disapproving glances were immediate. Many customers paused their elegant conversations to observe this disconcerting figure who dared to break the exclusivity bubble of Taste of Vermont. Marcus, the maitre d', hurried toward the intruder. "Sir, I'm afraid you're in the wrong place. This is a restaurant with mandatory reservations and a dress code." Lucas didn't respond immediately. His eyes wandered around the environment as if looking for something specific. When he finally spoke, his voice was surprisingly articulate. "I came to see Thomas Morgan." Marcus strategically positioned himself to block the view of the dining room. "The chef is busy. May I help you with something specific?" "Tell him Lucas Adams is here." The name meant nothing to Marcus, who was beginning to grow impatient. "Sir, I insist this is not an appropriate time. I can suggest that you come back another day with a prior appointment and—" He hesitated, as if searching for diplomatic words. "Properly dressed." From across the dining room, Thomas spotted the movement at the entrance, and his face visibly paled. For a moment it seemed he would hide in the kitchen, but something kept him paralyzed observing the scene. "What's happening, Thomas?" asked Christine, his wife and business partner, noticing his disturbance. He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the disheveled man. At the entrance, the situation was worsening. Marcus had called 2 security guards, discreetly positioned for important events. "Please, sir, we need you to leave," said one of them, lightly touching Lucas's arm. "Take your hands off me," exclaimed Lucas, stepping back. "I just want to talk to Thomas Morgan. He knows who I am." A woman dining at a table near the entrance stood up. It was Fiona Saunders, a food journalist who had come to cover the festival. "Why all the commotion? Let the man explain what he wants," she intervened, drawing more attention to the situation. "Ma'am, we're just following the establishment's rules," explained Marcus, visibly tense. "Rules made by whom and for whom?" retorted Fiona, looking around. "We're at a festival that celebrates Vermont culture and food, but only for those who can pay and dress appropriately." At that moment, Thomas finally emerged from his stupor and crossed the dining room with long strides, with Christine on his heels. The guests gradually fell silent, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. "Lucas," said Thomas, his voice almost a whisper when he reached the entrance. "Long time, Thomas," the man replied with a bitter smile. "I had to come, here to see what you've become." Christine observed the interaction with visible concern, while the security guards remained alert. Rebecca Armstrong, the influential critic, didn't miss a detail of the scene, mentally drafting her next article. "This isn't the time or place," said Thomas, almost pleading. "And when would it be? You never returned my calls. Your secretary always says you're busy. I had to travel almost 120 miles to speak with you personally." Fiona, the journalist, moved closer. "You know each other?" Before Thomas could answer, Lucas turned to her with an ironic smile. "Know each other? I taught him everything he knows. I was the chef and he was my apprentice 15 years ago at the Earthly Flavor in Burlington. Or doesn't he tell that part of the story in his interviews?" The silence in the dining room became oppressive. All eyes were fixed on Thomas, who seemed to diminish with each second. "Let's talk in my office," Thomas tried, holding Lucas's arm. "Now you want to talk?" Lucas laughed, pulling away. "No, Thomas. You chose to do everything out in the open. When you took my recipes and claimed them as your own. When you opened this place while I was fighting alcoholism after my wife passed away. When you became the darling of haute cuisine with dishes we developed together. Christine intervened. Please, Mr. Lucas, we can resolve this in a civilized manner. Civilized? Lucas laughed bitterly. Like your husband was civilized when he abandoned me at the most difficult time of my life and then appropriated our joint work. Fiona realized she had in her hands much more than a simple expulsion of a poorly dressed man. She discreetly turned on her phone's recorder. Thomas, realizing the situation was slipping out of his control, tried a different approach. You're drunk, Lucas. You don't know what you're saying. Come on, I'll call a taxi, you rest, and we'll talk tomorrow. I'm not drunk. I've been sober for 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days. Lucas stared at Thomas firmly. Enough time to rebuild my life and realize everything you did. Rebecca Armstrong, who was observing everything, approached. This man is making serious accusations, Thomas. Do you have anything to say? Before Thomas could answer, another renowned chef present at the event, Peter Coleman, rose from his table. Wait a minute. Lucas Adams, the creator of the famous smoking technique with local hardwoods, the chef who revolutionized the use of wild ramps. Lucas turned to him, surprised to be recognized. Yes, that's me. My God, continued Peter, approaching. I studied your articles in culinary school. Everyone said you had... He hesitated, looking for an appropriate word. Disappeared from the map. Fiona, sensing the story growing by the second, intervened. So you're a legend of Vermont cuisine? I was, Lucas replied bitterly, until alcohol defeated me after my wife passed away prematurely. And while I fought my demons, my most talented apprentice saw an opportunity. The glances turned back to Thomas, who seemed increasingly cornered. It wasn't like that, he finally defended himself. You abandoned everything, Lucas. The restaurant was drowning in debt. Suppliers didn't want to do business with us anymore. I tried to help, but you refused. And your help was to take our joint creations and open your own place? Questioned Lucas, his voice trembling with contained emotion. Christine, trying to control the damage, intervened. Please, this discussion doesn't benefit anyone. We can talk tomorrow calmly. But it was too late. Dozens of cell phones were already recording the confrontation, and the whispered comments among the guests indicated that Thomas Morgan's immaculate reputation was beginning to crack. Fiona, the journalist, wasted no time. Chef Thomas, are you denying that you used recipes developed in partnership with Chef Lucas without giving him credit? Thomas hesitated, and that single moment of hesitation spoke louder than any explanation he could offer afterward. The circumstances were complicated, he tried to argue. Lucas was unreachable. I developed and refined many of those recipes. Refined, exclaimed Lucas with irony. What an elegant word for intellectual theft. The tension in the air was palpable. The guests, previously so enthusiastic about the sophistication of the event, now watched a real drama unfolding before their eyes. Rebecca Armstrong, the influential critic, seemed especially intrigued. You know, Thomas, I've always wondered why your dishes, despite being technically perfect, seemed to lack soul. Now I'm starting to understand. Those words seemed to hit Thomas more deeply than any direct accusation from Lucas. His reputation, meticulously built over years, was crumbling before his eyes. It was Christine who finally made a drastic decision. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for this incident. Taste of Vermont will serve dessert and coffee on the house. As for you, Mr. Lucas, please accompany us to the office to resolve this situation properly. I don't need your charity desserts, Lucas responded. I came only so everyone would know the truth. He turned his back and walked toward the exit, leaving behind a deafening silence. Thomas, in a sudden impulse, ran after him. Lucas, wait! The plea echoed through the restaurant, making Lucas stop at the threshold of the door. What is it, Thomas? Afraid I'll tell something else? No, Thomas replied, his voice breaking. You're right. That unexpected admission surprised everyone, especially Christine, who looked at her husband as if she didn't recognize him. Thomas, what are you doing? She whispered. Ignoring her, Thomas continued. I should have given you credit. I should have looked for you when you recovered. I should have been better." Lucas observed his former apprentice with a mixture of surprise and distrust. "Why admit this now?" "Because I'm tired of living with this weight," Thomas replied, suddenly looking aged. "Because each award, each compliment comes with a pang of guilt. Because I've never been able to recreate the magic we had when we worked together." The silence that followed had a different weight. It was no longer the silence of shock or scandal, but something more complex, almost contemplative. Fiona, the journalist, broke the moment. "And now what happens next?" Thomas looked around at the faces watching him, at the empire he had built on questionable foundations, and then back at Lucas. "I want to propose something. A partnership. A fresh start." Christine looked horrified. "Thomas, you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," he replied, without taking his eyes off Lucas. 40% of the restaurant, your name recognized on all the dishes we created together, and total creative freedom." Lucas laughed bitterly. "Why would I accept? You think this makes up for lost years?" "No," Thomas admitted. "Nothing would make up for it, but it would be a start. And you always said our cuisine was bigger than ourselves. It was about sharing, not owning." Lucas seemed to consider the proposal while the guests watched in astonishment. "This public negotiation. I'd need more than words, Thomas." "Contract drafted tomorrow," Thomas promptly replied, "and a public announcement recognizing your contribution to everything I've built." Rebecca Armstrong, the food critic, approached. "You know, Lucas, your story of recovery combined with a triumphant return to gastronomy would be an extraordinary narrative. I could write about it myself." Peter Coleman, the other renowned chef, also spoke up. "And I'd love to learn some of your original techniques. I've always been an admirer." Lucas looked at all of them with suspicion. "Yesterday I was an unwanted homeless person. Today I'm a culinary legend to be cultivated." "Yesterday we didn't know your story," Fiona replied honestly. "And that makes us as guilty as Thomas for judging without knowing." Those words seemed to hit Lucas. He looked at Thomas again. "If we're going to start over, it has to be different. I don't just want to recreate the past." "What do you propose?" Thomas asked. "A school restaurant. Part of the profits financing training for low-income youth. Affordable prices on some days of the week. Cuisine that isn't just for the elite." Christine, surprisingly, was the first to respond. "That would considerably reduce our profits." "But it would increase our impact," Thomas countered, with a gleam in his eyes he hadn't shown in a long time. "It's a brilliant idea, Lucas, as always." Rebecca smiled. "A starred restaurant with a social purpose? That would be revolutionary in the American culinary scene." "It wouldn't be easy," Peter warned. "Haute cuisine has unwritten rules about exclusivity." "Maybe it's time to rewrite those rules," suggested Fiona, already imagining the series of articles she would write. Lucas extended his hand. "So we have a deal?" Thomas hesitated for only a second, looking at Christine, who still seemed distrustful, but finally nodded. He shook his former mentor's hand. "We have a deal." The following months were ones of intense transformation for Taste of Vermont. News of the partnership between Thomas and Lucas, along with the social project, spread quickly. Initially, there was resistance. Regular customers complained about changes to the menu and the new differentiated pricing policy on certain days of the week. Some exclusive suppliers hesitated to continue their partnership with an establishment that now popularized haute cuisine. Christine, initially skeptical, had surprisingly become the biggest advocate of the new business model, discovering social management skills she didn't know she possessed. She coordinated the scholarship program for young apprentices and negotiated with educational institutions. "I never imagined it would be so rewarding," she confessed to Fiona during an interview 6 months after that fateful night. Seeing these young people discovering their love for gastronomy, many who had never tasted anything beyond the basic food of their communities, is transformative. Thomas and Lucas had found a new balance in the kitchen. The initial tension gave way to a creative dynamic that surprised even the most skeptical food critics. "You can feel the difference," commented Rebecca Armstrong in her most recent column. The dishes aren't just technically perfect as they've always been, but now they carry an emotion, a story, a truth that transcends taste. Not everything was rosy, however. A group of investors who had expressed interest in Taste of Vermont before the changes withdrew their proposal, claiming that the new business model was too risky. Some traditionalist chefs openly criticized what they called the vulgarization of haute cuisine. The real crisis, however, came when one of the young apprentices, Matthew, just 17 years old, and coming from an underprivileged community on the outskirts of Mapleton Creek, was caught trying to steal expensive ingredients from the pantry. "This will destroy everything we've built," lamented Christine after discovering the incident. "Critics will say we trusted the wrong people." Lucas, however, had a different approach. "We need to understand why he did it before judging." They discovered that Matthew was trying to take the ingredients to prepare a special dinner for his sick mother, who had never tasted rich people's food, as he put it. Instead of expelling him from the program, Thomas and Lucas turned the situation into a lesson. "Let's prepare this dinner together," Lucas proposed, "at his house for his mother, and we'll show that good food doesn't belong to anyone. It exists to be shared." That improvised dinner in Matthew's small house, with his mother moved to tears as she tasted dishes prepared by renowned chefs, became a turning point. Fiona, invited to attend, transformed the experience into a moving report that went viral nationally. "Gastronomy that Transcends Walls, When Starred Restaurants Go to Communities," read the title. The article told not only the story of reconciliation between Thomas and Lucas, but how that seemingly negative incident had transformed into a new vision for the restaurant. Inspired by the experience, they created Flavors Without Borders, a program where monthly they brought haute cuisine to underprivileged communities, not just serving meals, but teaching simple techniques that could be replicated with accessible ingredients. The program attracted international media attention. A famous European food magazine dedicated a special edition to what they called the American Culinary Revolution, highlighting how Taste of Vermont was redefining the social role of haute cuisine. On the one-year anniversary of the partnership, during the graduation ceremony of the first class of the Young Apprentice program, Thomas gave an emotional speech. "A year ago, I was a lost man, even though I was at the top. I had achieved everything I thought was important: prestige, money, recognition. But there was an emptiness that no award could fill. It took Lucas coming back into my life, not to destroy it as I initially feared, but to remind it of its true purpose." Lucas, now considerably healthier and more elegant, though maintaining his characteristic authenticity, completed, "And I needed to forgive to free myself. Not just Thomas, but myself, for having allowed resentment to consume me for so long." The relationship between the two still had its moments of tension. They were strong personalities, with sometimes divergent views on gastronomy, but they had learned to transform this tension into creativity. The big test came when they were invited to present a special menu at the most prestigious culinary festival in North America, in New York. The pressure was enormous, especially because many in the industry still viewed their approach with skepticism. "We need to show that social inclusion doesn't mean giving up excellence," Thomas argued during planning. "And that excellence doesn't need to be exclusive or inaccessible," Lucas added. They decided to bring some of their apprentices to participate in the event, something unprecedented at a festival of that caliber. The presentation would include not only the tasting, but also the story behind each dish and the young person who had contributed to its development. The night before the festival, however, one of the country's leading food critics published an article questioning the participation of the apprentices. Haute cuisine requires years of rigorous training, replacing it with emotional stories of overcoming hardship is a disservice to culinary art, the text said. The article shook the confidence of some young people. Matthew, in particular, was about to give up. Maybe he's right. Who am I to be at this festival, he questioned, with tears in his eyes. It was Christine, surprisingly, who comforted him. 3 years ago, I would have agreed with that critic. I was the first to defend that haute cuisine was a privilege for the few. But do you know what I've learned? That talent doesn't choose social class, that culinary creativity can flourish anywhere, and that you, Matthew, have an understanding of flavors that many chefs trained in renowned schools would take years to develop. On the day of the festival, the Taste of Vermont booth was impeccable. Each dish told a story. The Lake Champlain, fish with cranberry reduction, had been inspired by Lucas's childhood memories. The Vermont cheese ravioli with blueberry emulsion was Thomas's reinterpretation of an Italian classic, using local ingredients. And the surprising wild ramp ice cream with walnut brittle had been created by Matthew. The critic who had published the negative article appeared clearly skeptical. Thomas and Lucas exchanged apprehensive glances, but remained true to the plan. Each tasting was presented not only by the chef, but also by the apprentice who had contributed to its creation. When Matthew presented his wild ramp ice cream, his hands were visibly shaking, but his voice gained firmness as he explained, "Wild ramps are a vegetable that many consider difficult to work with due to their intense flavor. In my community, we only use them in savory dishes, but I always imagined what it would be like to transform them into a dessert. This ice cream combines the intensity of wild ramps with the subtlety of vanilla and the crunch of walnuts, creating layers of flavor that gradually reveal themselves." The critic tasted it with a neutral expression, while Matthew waited tensely. After a few seconds that seemed like an eternity, he asked, "Who was your mentor in this creation?" Matthew hesitated, looking at Thomas and Lucas. "They gave me technical guidance, but the idea and development were mine." The critic nodded slowly. "Impressive. The texture is perfect, the balance of flavors is sophisticated, and there's an originality that I rarely see even in experienced chefs." That moment was just the beginning. The Taste of Vermont booth became the most talked about at the festival. Critics, chefs, and enthusiasts lined up to taste the dishes and learn about the social project behind them. At the closing ceremony, to everyone's surprise, Taste of Vermont received the Culinary Innovation Award, a category created especially to recognize their unique contribution. Upon receiving the award, Thomas, Lucas, Christine, and all the apprentices went up on stage together. It was Lucas who spoke. "Many years ago, when I started in gastronomy, I believed that recognition was the ultimate goal. Later, when I lost everything, I thought revenge would be my redemption. Today, I realized that the true purpose was always to share knowledge, flavors, stories. This award isn't ours, it belongs to everyone who believes that gastronomy can and should be an instrument of social transformation." Back in Mapleton Creek, Taste of Vermont became the epicenter of a quiet revolution. Restaurants from other regions began to implement similar programs. Culinary schools created scholarships for young people from disadvantaged communities. American haute cuisine, traditionally oriented toward European influences, turned increasingly toward local ingredients and techniques developed by traditional communities. Thomas, who previously lived obsessed with stars and recognition, found deeper satisfaction in seeing his apprentices develop. Lucas, who had returned driven by bitterness, rediscovered his passion for teaching. And Christine, the pragmatic businesswoman, became a tireless advocate for gastronomy as a tool for social inclusion. In an interview for the same magazine that had highlighted the American culinary revolution, Thomas reflected, "The greatest lesson of these 2 years was understanding that true excellence isn't just in the final dish, but in the process and purpose. Gastronomy has the power to transform lives, not just of those who eat, but especially of those who cook." Lucas added, "And the most beautiful paradox we discovered is that by opening our doors, by sharing our knowledge, by no longer treating gastronomy as an exclusive privilege, we didn't dilute its excellence. On the contrary, we enriched its diversity and meaning." That night, as they observed the full restaurant, with a harmonious mixture of customers from different social backgrounds, all united by the appreciation of good food, Thomas, Lucas, and Christine silently toasted. What had begun as a confrontation born of resentment had transformed into a journey of redemption, reconciliation, and reinvention, proving that sometimes we need to lose everything we believe to be important to discover what really matters. The end. Dear listeners, we hope that Thomas and Lucas's story has touched your hearts and sparked reflections on the true meaning of success and redemption. If you were moved by this journey of transformation in the small town of Mapleton Creek, Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day, we bring unique stories that explore the complexities of human relationships and the unexpected paths of life. Share in the comments which moment touched you most in this narrative of reconciliation and purpose. Your opinion is essential for us to continue creating content that moves and inspires.